Put that money back, Vivian Harrow snapped, like she had been appointed mayor of every apple tree in Chelan County. Then she tore my hand-painted Private Orchard sign off the post, cracked it across her knee, and dropped the pieces at my boots while 12 tourists stood there holding bags of my fruit. I did not yell, because what Vivian did not know was that every bag carried an RFID tag, every gate had a camera, and every pound leaving my land was already being counted. My name is Caleb Mercer, and 3 years before Vivian decided my orchard belonged to her neighborhood, I buried my wife Rose beneath a cedar at the west end of Row 9. Rose had grown up on that land, back when the nearest house was 6 miles away and the biggest August problem was keeping deer out of the pears. She planted the first Honeycrisp trees with her father, painted the U-pick sign herself, and could judge a branch by the sound it made when she bent it. I had spent 22 years designing tracking systems in Seattle, but when Rose got sick, I sold my share of the company, came home, and learned how to prune. After she died, I stayed because leaving felt too much like losing her twice. I also did what engineers do when grief gets too quiet. I measured things. I put cameras inside Bluebird boxes, sensors beneath the checkout platform, and tags inside every picking bag, which my neighbor Gus Malloy called an expensive way to catch a grandmother stealing 2 pears. Trouble started when a gated development called Bellwether Ridge opened along my north fence, 200 homes and enough committees to govern a small republic. The county approved a walking trail beside my property so residents could reach the river park, and I had no problem with that. Rose would have liked seeing families pass by. Then Vivian moved into the largest house in Bellwether, arrived in a Range Rover, and became HOA president before half her boxes were unpacked. At first I noticed groups of strangers slipping through the orchard gate, picking apples and leaving without stopping at the scale. When I confronted her, Vivian smiled, touched my arm, and said, "Caleb, this is what community looks like. You do not want to be the bitter old man at the fence." That night my system showed 73 pounds missing. I opened a spreadsheet, named it Harrow, and started logging dates, faces, weights, and license plates. A week later, I installed new signs. 2 days after that, Vivian mailed me an HOA violation for visual clutter even though my orchard was not part of her HOA and had been there 31 years before Bellwether broke ground. I sent back one sentence, "Your rules stop where my fence begins." The next morning, every sign had been spray painted with the words, "Free community picking." The footage showed a teenage boy doing it at 4000 1880 mime, then walking to Vivian's Range Rover, where she handed him cash through the window. Gus wanted me to call the sheriff, but I shook my head. A vandalism charge would make her cautious, and I needed her confident. 3 days later, my seasonal worker, Noah, found an event listing. Bellwether Orchard Experience, $30 per person, basket included, 3 tours every weekend. At the bottom was a photograph of Vivian beneath Rose's old U-pick sign, smiling like she had planted the place herself, and then I understood she was not just stealing fruit. She was building a business on my wife's land. I stared at that event page for a long time, longer than I want to admit, because there are moments when anger does not arrive. Like fire, it arrives like cold water, slow and heavy, filling every space inside you until you can barely move. Vivian had taken Rose's handwriting, Rose's trees, Rose's little wooden scale house, and turned all of it into a $30 weekend package for people who thought they were supporting a local family orchard. I could have shut the gate that afternoon, chained it, posted a deputy at the trail, and probably ended the whole thing before sunset. But by then I knew Vivian well enough to understand what she wanted. She wanted a scene. She wanted a video of an angry widower shouting at families so she could post it in the Bellwether group and say, "See, this is why the orchard needs community oversight." So I gave her the opposite. The next Saturday, I walked out during one of her tours with my hands in my pockets and smiled while she introduced me as Caleb, our orchard caretaker. Caretaker, that word nearly made me laugh. 14 people applauded. One man asked if Vivian had inherited the property, and she answered before I could open my mouth. She said, "It has always been part of the Bellwether landscape." Technically, that was true in the same way a bank technically becomes part of your neighborhood after it is built across the street. I told the guests to enjoy themselves, then went back to the packing shed and added 3 new columns to my spreadsheet: ticket revenue, fruit weight, and estimated resale value. By the end of August, Vivian had run 27 tours. She had taken nearly 1,800 pounds of apples and pears, collected more than $11,000 in fees, and charged short-term renters an extra $75 for what she called private harvest access. The first real break came from a woman named Marissa Dane, an 8th grade counselor who lived 2 streets behind Vivian. She came to my scale house one Tuesday with 6 pounds of apples and a face that looked like she had been carrying a secret all morning. She paid, then slid a folder across the counter. Inside were screenshots from the HOA page, copies of digital invitations, and a message Vivian had sent her residents claiming I donated the orchard every weekend for community enrichment. Marissa whispered, "We did not know you were being robbed." I told her most theft depends on somebody convincing decent people that nothing wrong is happening. She looked toward row 9, where Rose's cedars stood above the trees, and said Vivian had been pushing the board to declare the northern section a shared agricultural corridor. That phrase bothered me more than the money. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived from the county planning office. Bellwether Ridge had requested a land use review for 3 acres along my north boundary, including the Honeycrisp Rose planted with her father. The application described the land as an underused transition zone suitable for public recreation. At the bottom was the name of the planning commissioner who had sponsored the review, Martin Harrow, Vivian's husband. Martin was a polished man with silver hair, expensive boots, and the kind of handshake that made you feel like you was checking whether your watch was worth taking. He had spent 20 years representing developers and had apparently decided my orchard was easier to acquire 1 regulation at a time than 1 acre at a time. That was when I called Lena Ward, an attorney in Wenatchee who had handled Rose's estate and had never once lost an argument politely. I drove to her office with 3 binders, 2 hard drives, the vandalism footage, and my spreadsheet. Lena reviewed everything without speaking, then leaned back and said, "Caleb, his wife is profiting from land he is trying to reclassify. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a map with motive drawn on it." She told me the orchard was protected as an established agricultural operation, but she also warned me that winning the land hearing alone would not stop Vivian. People like her did not quit when they lost. They simply changed the name of the fight. So Lena handled the county while I kept watching the fruit. A week later, on my way home from buying irrigation parts, I saw a white canopy at a roadside market with a sign that read Harrow Heritage Orchard, family grown since 1978. Beneath it sat stacks of polished Honeycrisp apples in the same paper bags Rose had designed 10 years earlier. I parked across the road, bought 2 bags and a baseball cap and sunglasses, then opened them in my truck. Both tags came from row 9. One had been scanned leaving my property at 6:42 that morning. The woman was not just taking apples for tours, she was selling them under a fake family history. I called Lena, and for the first time since this began, she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because Vivian had finally crossed from arrogance into something a jury could understand. We brought in my accountant, a state agriculture investigator, and Sheriff Tom Haskins, who had known Rose since high school and hated bullies with paperwork. Then Vivian announced the Bellwether Autumn Jubilee, 250 tickets, live music, food trucks, and a stage to be built inside my orchard. That was the moment our plan changed. We were no longer going to stop her before the festival. We were going to let her believe she had won, let her move the fruit, let her collect the money, and let her place every piece of evidence exactly where the cameras could see it. I sent her a short letter saying maybe we should talk after the event. By sunset, she had posted it online as proof of my full support. Gus read the post at my kitchen table and shook his head. "She thinks you surrendered," he said. I looked at Rose's photograph beside the window and watched the first tracking signals light up on my laptop. No, I told him, she just walked through the gate, and this time I was the one who left it open. Friday night, 3 trucks rolled down my access road with their headlights off, and from the packing shed I watched Vivian direct a crew as they drove stakes into Rose's soil and built a stage across row 9. Sheriff Haskins stood beside me while every board and step across the boundary was recorded. Just before midnight, Vivian sent the workers home, walked into the orchard alone, and began filling crates. She took 86 bags of Honeycrisp apples, including 4 decoy bags Noah had prepared with hidden GPS tags. At 12:17, the signal stopped inside her garage. At 5:41 the next morning, they started moving toward the market. By sunrise, Lena was at the county building with the Harrow's emails, and the state investigator was waiting near Vivian's booth. I put on Rose's Mercer Orchard shirt and drove into town with Gus. Vivian's booth was already busy. Apples were stacked beneath a sign that read Harrow Heritage Orchard, and she was telling a young mother that her family had farmed the valley for generations. At 9:12, the investigator scanned the first bag. The screen displayed Mercer Orchard, row 9, 11:43 p.m. He scanned another, then another, and every beep seemed to remove a layer of confidence from Vivian's face. She laughed, claimed the equipment was malfunctioning, then noticed the camera and changed her story. Caleb gave me permission, she said. Across town, Lena was presenting emails proving Martin had drafted the land review before it became public, while his wife was already profiting from fruit taken from the same acreage. The county chairman ordered Martin to leave the hearing. Back at the market, Sheriff Haskins stepped behind Vivian's booth in full uniform. She looked past him and finally saw me. "Caleb, tell them," she said, her voice cracking. I walked over carrying one apple from row 9 and placed it on the counter. "You kept calling this community property," I told her. "The problem is, community property still has an owner." The investigators scanned the apple, and the screen matched every bag around it. For the first time since Vivian moved into Bellwether, she had nothing to say. She was arrested for theft, trespass, and fraudulent labeling while her live stream continued beside the cash box. Customers stepped forward with tour receipts, and by noon there were 14. The festival was canceled. The food trucks turned around at my gate, and Bellwether residents demanded access to the HOA accounts. Marissa found nearly $20,000 routed into Vivian's personal account. Martin resigned 4 days later. Vivian lost the HOA presidency in a recall vote, and the land review disappeared. The restitution helped create a scholarship in Rose's name for local agriculture students. The next fall, we held a real community harvest day. Children picked for free, seniors paid whatever they wanted, and Noah showed families how the tracking system worked. At sunset, I carried the first apple of the season to Rose's cedar and sat there until the light left row 9. I had spent months thinking justice would feel loud, but it did not. It felt like wind moving through leaves someone you loved had planted. I still wonder whether I should have stopped Vivian earlier, before the money grew and before the public arrest. Some people say I let her go too far because I wanted the ending to hurt. Maybe they are right. So tell me, was I protecting my land, or did I become too comfortable watching her build her own trap? Leave your answer in the comments, share this story, and subscribe for the next one.